One of the most common misconceptions of intermittent fasting is that it's a form of starvation or just calorie restriction, period. Intermittent fasting itself is not a form of calorie restriction, but a lot of people use it that way. Today, I'm breaking down the differences between fasting and starving so that you can use this information to achieve your weight loss and wellness goals. All right, guys, if you're new to my channel and you don't know who I am, my name's Autumn and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's nutrition human performance. On my channel, I share with you how you can actually achieve your wellness dreams without counting calories. So if you have a wellness goal in mind, make sure you subscribe. Okay, but first, what is intermittent fasting? Now, there are a ton of different methods on how to use intermittent fasting with alternate day fasting, 16-8 method, there's even OMAD. But for simplicity's sakes, we're going to be talking about the time restricted method, which is where you're fasting from 12 to 18 hours a day. Now there's multiple goals for intermittent fasting, especially when it comes to weight loss, gut health, as well as cell health. And intermittent fasting achieves those wellness goals by using that gut rest, as well as spacing out meals and having a gap between meals. Now the goal with intermittent fasting is to provide your GI tract or your gut rest while decreasing the number of times that you eat throughout the day. This helps with healing your gut as well as promoting weight loss or tapping into fat burning mechanisms. The gut rest itself promotes gut health by stimulating an extremely natural and normal process in our body called the migrating motor complex, or the MMC. And this acts to clean out your GI tract of left behind food and bacteria that can cause issues ranging from bloating to SIBO. And intermittent fasting acts to stimulate that MMC pathway. And if you're using intermittent fasting properly, you're still eating the amount and the types of food that you need in order to feed and fuel your cells within your body. Some of the benefits that are typically seen with intermittent fasting include improved insulin sensitivity, decreased body fat percentage, improved growth hormone, as well as decreased bloating. Now, what is starvation? Simply put, starvation is when your cells aren't getting enough energy in order to perform normal bodily functions. In fact, the medical definition of starvation is the severe or total lack of nutrients needed to maintain life. A state of semi-starvation is what a lot of these calorie in, calorie out type of calorie restrictive diet protocols rely on. This is why you'll often see muscle loss or issues with fertility and other types of starvation symptoms when it comes to consistently using calorie restriction as a dietary protocol. Now, interestingly, you can also see these same starvation effects even if you are obese or overweight. Now let's rewind here. Now we're in agreement that starvation is the lack of nutrients needed in order to maintain life. So how is it that someone who is obese or overweight could be in this state? It comes down to the fact that when we're talking about maintenance of life, we're talking about the cellular level, aka cellular starvation. And this all comes down to your cells' access to nutrients within the body. Now, for example, to put this into perspective, if you had $1 million in stocks or bonds and you wanted to buy a house that was $1 million, then theoretically you should be able to do it, but it doesn't mean that you could immediately go over and buy the house with your stocks or bonds because you haven't released or liquidated that cash in order to actually be able to use it. So yeah, even though theoretically you may have the money, you don't have access to the money. It's not until you free it up from those bonds or those stocks that you can actually use that money for a transaction of buying that house. And this same concept applies to nutrients within the body. If these nutrients are locked up, you can't use it no matter how much of those nutrients you may have on hand. And the main hormone that locks up these assets within your body to be able to use it as fuel is called insulin. Now, the energy that you eat every day has two different outcomes. It can either be stored as energy or used as energy. And most of that stored energy is stored in our fat cells. Under fasted or low insulin states, your cells can freely access the fat and that energy that's within your fat cells, aka fat burning. Not only does this supply your cells and fuel your cells with energy, it also makes it so that you're in that state of weight loss. But once insulin is secreted, and particularly in those higher amounts, it locks up those fat cells, makes it so that your brain cells, your heart cells, your liver cells, your lungs, none of these essential cells can receive that fuel that's locked up within the fat. That means that your cells are internally starving. Even though you have that available, even though you have the fuel available, you aren't able to use it. And this is when that internal starvation mode kicks in and your body starts to access the protein that's stored in your muscles as fuel instead, which is where you see that muscle loss, which is again a very common sign of starvation. And insulin is mostly secreted in response to carbohydrates, so starches and sugars. It's secreted in a small amount to protein as well as fat, but nothing when compared to the amount secreted in response to carbohydrates. With this in mind, you could have a diet that's high in sugars or carbohydrates that cause that big release of insulin, locks up your fat cells, stores your carbohydrates, and causes your body to internally starve. It's in this situation where you can both be overweight or obese, but also your cells internally starving. And when we look at the common signs of starvation, it results in decreased muscle mass, irritability, difficulties concentrating, decreased body temperature, and anemia. And depending on the state of starvation, and if that also accompanies the protein malnourishment, which is very common too, you could also experience brittle nails or hair loss. So what is the difference when we look at starvation and intermittent fasting? With intermittent fasting, you're not eating less, you're just eating less often. And it's important to note that one of the main effects of intermittent fasting is it does help to improve insulin resistance and decreasing that insulin response purely just by eating less often. And that in itself helps to free up those fat cells, your body able to use that fat as an energy source, and those vital cells within your body use those sources of energy too, which of course results in weight loss because you're able to use those fat as fuel, but also helps to prevent that internal cellular starvation. Now, if you pair intermittent fasting further with the types of foods that also help to decrease that insulin response, like what we talk about all the time in the complete intermittent fasting bundle and the recipes that accompany it, you can further drive the nourishment of your cells while also decreasing your body fat percentage. Now, with starvation, this can come in two different ways. One is either you're not eating for very extended amounts of time, so we're talking about at least multiple days, if not weeks of not eating. The other is the semi-starvation state of those calorie reduction and calorie restriction diet protocols, especially when you're using it for multiple months at a time. And also, if we're talking about that true definition of starvation, remember that lack of available nourishment or energy for your cells, those chronically high levels of insulin can also be attributed to that, because those high levels of insulin block your cells from even being able to access that energy. So how can you tell the difference? It's pretty easy to mask a calorie restrictive diet by saying it's intermittent fasting and simply just not eating enough. But by pairing calorie restriction with intermittent fasting, this is still just a calorie restrictive diet and therefore still a semi-starvation diet. Now, if you're eating until satiated, you don't necessarily need to be concerned with this. We're mostly talking about here if you're looking at counting every calorie you're eating and actively trying to reduce it, causing yourself to still be hungry. And an easy way to spot the difference between starvation and intermittent fasting done properly, if you find that you're losing muscle mass while also losing body fat percentage, or losing muscle mass while not losing body fat percentage, this itself could be that state of starvation. Now, on the flip side, if you're losing body fat or decreasing your body fat percentage while either maintaining muscle mass or increasing muscle mass, then this is a sign that you could just be using intermittent fasting properly. This is also one of the main goals that we talk about within the complete intermittent fasting bundle protocols. Now, in order to determine this, one of my favorite tools to use is a body fat scanner. I typically recommend going to your local gym. Depending on the type of gym you're at, they should have a varied amount of different body fat scanners you can use. If they have an in-body machine, that's kind of like the pinnacle, because you can also see what's happening at your muscle mass level as well as the body fat percentage level, which for when it comes to determining a state of starvation, knowing your muscle mass is also important. You can also get some at-home tools, but these ones are just typically less reliable. Now, if you are using intermittent fasting and you want to make sure you're using it properly, make sure you check out the 5 break fast mistakes I very often see right here. Also, if you're new to my channel and you love the science-backed information, make sure you subscribe right here. I come out with new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.